Section: Digital Free. Chapter: Too Cheap to Matter. The Webb's lesson: when something halves in price each year, zero is inevitable. In 1954, at the dawn of nuclear power, Lewis Strauss, the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, stood before a group of science writers in New York City and foretold great things to come. Diseases would be conquered, and we would soon come to understand what causes man to age. People would soon travel effortlessly over the sea and through the air at great speeds. Great periodic regional famines would become a matter of history. And, most famously, he predicted, "It is not too much to expect that our children will enjoy in their homes electrical energy too cheap to meter." These were optimistic times. It was the beginning of the space age. Modern medicine was conquering ancient afflictions. Chemistry was bringing better living and feeding the planet. And the information age was dawning with infinite possibility. Anything that could be invented would be invented, and then quickly branded, packaged, and sold to an emerging class of free-spending consumers. The post-war optimism that science and technology could launch a prosperous era of unprecedented growth extended from national pride to domestic bliss. The power of human thought and clever machinery promised to liberate us from household drudgery and end war. The question wasn't whether we'd live in space colonies, but what we'd wear there. The Jetsons were a joke, but no more so than the Flintstones. The notion we'd someday have space taxis and robot butlers was as certain as the fact we'd once dwelled in caves. And indeed, the post-war science and technology boom did set us on a path of increasing productivity and economic growth at a rate never before seen. But it wasn't quite as rosy as Strauss predicted. Electricity didn't get too cheap to meter. Although the fuel costs of uranium were low compared to coal, the initial costs of building the reactors and power plants turned out to be much higher. Waste disposal was and remains an unsolved problem, and an expensive and risky proposition became doubly so after 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. Today, nuclear energy costs about the same as coal, which is to say that it didn't change the economics of electricity one bit. But what if Strauss had been right? What if electricity had in fact become virtually free? The answer is that everything that electricity touched, which is to say nearly everything, would have been transformed. Rather than balance electricity against other energy sources, we'd now use electricity as much as we could. We'd waste it, because it would be so cheap that it wouldn't be worth worrying about efficiency. All buildings would be electrically heated, never mind the thermal conversion rate. We'd all be driving electric cars. Free electricity would be incentive enough to develop the efficient battery technology to store it. Massive desalination plants would turn seawater into all the fresh water anyone could want, allowing us to irrigate vast inland swaths and turn deserts into fertile acres. Because 2 of the 3 major inputs to agriculture, air and sun, are free, and water would now join them, we could begin to grow crops far in surplus to our food requirements, and many of them would be the feedstocks for biofuels. In comparison, fossil fuels would be seen as ludicrously expensive and dirty. So net carbon emissions would plummet. Plants take carbon out of the atmosphere before they release it again in burning, while oil and coal add more carbon. The phrase global warming might never have entered the language. In short, too cheap to meter would have changed the world. Unlikely?